Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We've been around for 50 years, and we are very, very, very happy always to be in the space of the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history. This is our second event here this week, and we are full of events in April and May, so definitely pick up a flyer here or follow the library online to stay current on everything they're doing, everything Charis is doing. Now is a really important time, obviously, to be paying attention to our public libraries. They need our support, they need our vigilance, and we just have such gratitude for all the librarians who work here, who make our community better. So thank you to the Auburn Avenue Research Library, and thank you to all of y'all who are here to celebrate Integrated, How American Schools Failed Black Children. This is a new book by Noliwe Rooks, and she is here in conversation with Dr. Bettina L, who we love, and we're always glad to have in the space in one way or another. Dr. Love has celebrated many books at Auburn Avenue and at Charis, so we've gotten to have many conversations in many, many spaces. This book tonight, Integrated, How American Schools Failed Black Children, is a powerful, incisive reckoning with the impacts of school desegregation that traces 4 generations of the author's family to show how the implementation of integration decimated Black school systems and did much of the community a disservice. So I want to introduce Noliwe Rooks. She is the L. Herbert Ballou University Professor of Africana Studies and the Chair of Africana Studies at Brown University. Her work explores how race and gender both impact and are impacted by popular culture, social history, and political life in the United States. She studies the cultural and racial implications of beauty, fashion, and adornment, race, capitalism, and education, and the urban politics of food and cannabis production. Rooks has received research funding from the Ford Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, and the Woodrow Wilson School, among others. She is the author of 5 books and a regular contributor to outlets including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Time, and NPR. Dr. Bettina L. Love is the William F. Russell Professor at Teachers College, Columbia University, and the best-selling author of We Want to Do More Than Survive and Punished for Dreaming, How School Reform Harms Black Children and How We Heal. In 2022, the Kennedy Center named Dr. Love one of the next 50 leaders making the world a more inspired, inclusive, and compassionate place. She is a co-founder of the Abolitionist Teaching Network, ATN, whose mission is to develop and support teachers and parents fighting injustice within schools and communities. The ATN has granted over $250,000 to abolitionists around the country. She's also a founding member of the task force that launched the program In Her Hands, distributing more than $15 million to Black women living in Georgia. In Her Hands is one of the largest guaranteed income pilot programs in the US. Dr. Love is a sought-after speaker on a range of topics. We were just talking about how she's barely been here in Georgia because she's been traveling all over. So we're very grateful to have her here with us tonight for this very important conversation. So please put your hands together for Dr. Bettina L. Love and Noliwe Rooks.
You know, it's funny, I have not seen Tina for a couple of years. So all during the introduction, all that, like I'm doing the big catch up. How the kids, what are they doing? What's going on? What's in your world? This is so great. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, anytime. How y'all doing?
Great.
I'm on. It's really wonderful to see you all. It's really wonderful to share space with you all. There's so much to talk about. I love that you all came out and hear a book about education.
Yes. Thank you.
Because we are in a very precarious state, very precarious time, and this book really gives us a roadmap and a master. I read this book a while back, but I was rereading it, and I said to myself, I play a historian, you are a historian, right? Because it is just a beautiful accounting and dates and facts and histories and stories. But I want to start with your father. Because I think oftentimes, no shade to historians, right? It's dates and it's facts, and it's, you know, there's no life. But this book is written from a beautiful historian, but also weaving these unbelievable narratives of your father and you and your son. So I just want to start with the foundation, Milton, right? I'll start with the foundation. And what's interesting is that Clearwater, Florida.
Yes.
My father's from Jacksonville, Florida, so we can be cousins. So start with why this story starts with your family.
Yeah, thank you, and really thank y'all for coming. I know traffic is horrible. It's a nice day. You have options. There's other places you could be. I appreciate you taking some time to be here. I'm sorry? You can't hear me?
Period.
Okay.
You in Atlanta.
Oh, period.
It's called and response. It's call and response. Period.
I went to college in Atlanta. I clearly have forgotten the Spelman grade, but
There we go. Come on.
clearly have forgotten how to call and response. So the idea for thinking about my family, it starts with my grandparents, who were teachers in the segregated South in Clearwater, Florida. They both were. My grandmother was a reading teacher. My grandfather did political science and was a principal of the high school. And I had been writing a lot about segregation in schools and the history of teaching, and I started realizing that I couldn't fit my family experiences in what I was reading and teaching and talking to people about. So somehow, just to start with sort of Brown v. Board, which is if you're doing education, black people, you're going to go through that period. What I knew about that period was that there were impactful black teachers all throughout the South, that there were high quality schools because there were impactful black teachers all throughout the South. Now, this is not all schools, all teachers, but I knew that those people existed, and I knew that they moved in community, and I knew that they loved black kids, because I grew up in Clearwater with my grandparents, and people would stop them in the store and talk about, you know, like, thank you for this, or what about that? So I knew that everything in the pre-Brown South, educationally, was not ruined. It was not decay. But I was constantly teaching people that it was, because that's the narrative that we have, that we needed integration. We needed Brown v. Board to save black children. And so finally, from the depths of my spirit, my family conscience, I was like, but you don't have to figure out how to tell a story that makes sense with what you actually know to be true. And it's not that my family is extraordinary, exceptional. These stories are reproduced all over. They're just sort of absent. So my father, what I realized about him is he grew up in segregated black schools taught by his parents. There was a whole drama about that, having your parents be your teachers. That's a normal kind of adolescent growing up thing. And then he went to Howard University the fall after Emmett Till was murdered. And Emmett Till's murder messed him up, and all of the students graduating at that time, it was a wound for them. So he went to Howard University, majored in econ and philosophy. My father was brilliant. My father played instruments, had a TV show, played golf. Like, my father did all these kinds of things. He left Howard, went out to California to Golden Gate College of Law, where he was recruited, and it was the first time he had ever been in an educational environment where people didn't think he was smart, where they didn't think he was capable. They didn't fully think he was human, is what my mother tells me they would talk about as he came back. So he's in law school, and a professor will call on you. He raise his hand or respond when called on with whatever was being asked, and he was always told it wasn't good enough. Just not try again. You're just not quite prepared. Do better. And then he would listen to his white classmates literally rephrase what he had just said and be called brilliant. And after 2 years of that, he succumbed to drinking, which had always been since Emmett Till got killed, had been in the back of his mind, but it took over his life. He didn't know how to navigate it. And I realized, like writing this book and thinking about it, he had really been built to survive in a black world. Because what my grandparents lived in was a black world. Now they fought for integration. My grandfather was a member of the NAACP, but they didn't live among white people like that. And he had no context for how to navigate and survive it. And so, but I realized then again in the teaching, I couldn't see my grandparents, and I couldn't find my father, people who went into these white spaces and couldn't do it. He was fine to only live around black people after, like he went back to Washington D.C. for a while, and went back to like for him that was comfort. And I realized I just never saw or heard of people who the opportunity to integrate was not in their best interest, or wasn't the best thing for their psyche, spirits, and souls. And I was really trying to make sense of that. And then I started thinking about my history and my kids. So the way that I got to talking about my family was, I think that we humanize the history. So there are facts and there's figures, but there's enough of who we are, what education was like for us, what these moments, how educational policy shaped us in our trajectories. I mean, my trajectory and my son's, because we were in integrated schools, we benefited from. We're among the 20 to 25%, about 20-25% of black folks since 1954, all in, have actually gone to and benefited from what you would call integrated schools. The others, 70-80%, that's a whole other story, and that's a part of the story. It's kind of like we keep celebrating the successes, like me. Oh, look, you're at Ivy League school, and this. My son is, went to a good white people school, and works in a corporation. Like he's somebody you'd be like, oh yes, boy, you've really done something. We're always celebrating those successes, and we don't always look at those opportunities are just denied. It's just not possible for them to benefit from it, and their educational experiences are completely different and often segregated, but without the impactful black teachers that made an earlier period of segregation something that people could survive. So all those complications, the best way that I could do it was tell stories about them.
Oh, I love that. What I loved about the book is you're a beautiful writer.
Thank you.
And you say this on page 101 about your dad. And when you asked him, like, did he have any regrets not finishing law school? And he says his answer was clear. He did not regret it at all. He had long stopped believing that law alone could heal the hate he grew to know so well. He didn't know what was required, but the aftermath of Brown's decision taught him that achieving black educational access will require more than an endorsement of the Supreme Court of the United States. He no longer even really believed that integration was the cure. For my father, the ruling was just a piece of paper that would not protect or make safe the black children being blown into the white classroom by the winds of change. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about Brown.
Okay. Well, the one thing that I didn't actually put in the book, but it's a story I tell regularly, and y'all probably know this story about Thurgood Marshall. So Thurgood Marshall cut his teeth. I mean, my grandparents knew Thurgood Marshall because they were teachers in the South in the 30s. Thurgood Marshall first argued before the Supreme Court for teacher equalization cases. He was around very much. A man named Noah Griffin had been his teacher at Lincoln University. And so when they started saying we should be paid equally, and the schools were firing them and doing all the things because they didn't want, Florida schools were not trying to pay black teachers equally. they were like, I had a brilliant, brilliant student. He's doing some things with law. Let's see if we can get him involved. So Thurgood Marshall believed deeply in the law, unlike my father. Thurgood Marshall believed deeply in it. He believed in the rule of law. He believed that we were a nation of laws. And so after Brown v. Board, after the win, after it was announced, one of the statements that he gave in the aftermath was to say, the Supreme Court has spoken. I'm completely paraphrasing here. The Supreme Court has spoken, and because we are a nation of laws, there will be no pushback to Brown. There will be no, the people will bend. People may grumble, but they will bend because the Supreme Court of the United States has said, this is the law and what has to happen. And it was a few months later, a majority of the Congress of the United States, a majority of the sitting members of Congress get together and start putting out manifestos about we will massively resist integration. The governors all over the South are closing school districts, some for just a couple weeks, the longest 5 years, some for a year or two. They're like, no, we're not doing this. You're taking our freedom from us. You're taking our choice. You're forcing this on us. Now, what is the law if not a weapon to force you to do so? I mean, you do things if you want to do them or not, because it's the law. That's the whole point. They were like, yeah, no, this is a bad law, and we're going to resist it. And then Thurgood Marshall gets on the Supreme Court, and every school case, every integration case, everything having to do with his life's work that came before him was about dismantling Brown. He was always in the minority. And I wonder, in this in this way that we need to, I'm always wanting to humanize my heroes. What must that have done to his psyche? What did that mean to him? Because he really believed this was not rhetoric for him, that the law was a weapon. That was a weapon in the hands of black people could lead to black freedom. That's what he thought. He was like, I figured it out. It's the secret sauce. You have to figure out how to get to the Supreme Court. Black freedom depends on the law. And the case that was his pinnacle, it ends up, he watches it be just dismantled. The other thing that I didn't know, so I think, so even though I don't tell that story in his story, because he's not my family like that, I hit that thinking about Brown and what it must have meant to him as someone who created it in community with Pauli Murray, Constance Baker Motley, Charles Hammond in Houston. He was not out there by himself, in community. But he had to watch this thing be dismantled. And one of the things that I didn't know until fairly recently, till a couple years ago when I was doing this research, was the complications of the Brown case. So I didn't know that black people in Topeka, Kansas, black people in Kansas, first the NAACP came to Wichita, Kansas, and they were like, we want a case. We want to get a case, and we're going to litigate it, because they were already looking for cases that they could bundle together. It was part of the strategy, and go to the Supreme Court to challenge educational segregation. And so they were like, Wichita schools, we think that we have a good case, because Kansas, the way Kansas was racist, was coming out of Reconstruction. All across the South, of course, they start dismantling all of the progress black people made. You can't own property anymore. You can't vote anymore. You can't go to school anymore. So everything that had been made possible for that 8 years, they're busy dismantling. Kansas said, well, you can go to school, but we're going to be a separate but equal state. But unlike in the Deep South, because Kansas is, it's supposed to be Midwest, but it is unintelligible from the South. Unlike what they did, what they were kind of like, on paper, we're going to call this separate but equal, and we'll give y'all nothing. We will give you pennies. We will put you in a chicken coop and call it a mansion. We will give black people Zippo in much of the South. But in Kansas, they were people of their word. The districts were funded to the dollar, the same way that white districts were funded. The buildings were new, beautiful, shiny. Everybody from the janitors to the teachers paid exactly the same. School books, as good as any place. They were separate and equal. And so the NAACP comes and says, but this is what we want to challenge because we don't think separate but equal, we got to get rid of it. We want to challenge this. We want to go to the heart of separate but equal in Kansas and challenge it. And black people in Wichita, Kansas ran the NAACP out of town. They ran Thurgood Marshall out of town. The leadership, the local leadership, and the black teachers and principals were like, what are you talking about? Why would we give up schools that are what is broken here, except in your mind? Like what here is not functioning? No. And then they go to Topeka, so they're like, we're gonna find a different place. Topeka had a little bit different, they had a much higher class black people there who actually did have an interest in dismantling this idea of black inferiorities in a different kind of way. So they go there, but black people in Topeka, Kansas, where Brown v. Board is being litigated, this case, fought the NAACP for 10 years. They hired lawyers to fight the NAACP trying to take separate but equal schools from them. They were passing the hat, collecting money, trying to go outside and find people. How do we fight them? And it's a battle. It is a battle that they lost, that those folks lost. And what they said was, you're going to decimate black politics because at the time, schools that by the mid 20th century portion of the Black freedom struggle, which we're here in Auburn Avenue, we're here, we associate with the Black church. It's black preachers that we start with. Very often it's black preachers that are making these interventions that make sense. So the Black church is this arm of activism and grassroots struggle. Pre-Brown v. Board, it was schools that were the center. So from the 20s to the 50s, it's really these teachers and these principals and the wealth that is circulating in black communities in places like Kansas where they paid the same as everybody. So it was not insignificant. And they were like, how will we get this back? What will it be replaced with? And as my grandfather said to my mother once, like she told me, as he's fighting, in Florida now, not Kansas, for integration, she said he looked at her one day and said, but daughter, I worry they will not love our children over there. And that's what was motivating this fight, their belief that they knew these people, they knew their white people. And sending their children into that didn't make sense to them. The idea that they had, I know, you're not gonna ask me another question because now I'm just like talking forever. But the thing that they wanted to do, that my grandparents and folks in Topeka, were saying, well, if we're gonna do it, let's do it like this. Let's send black teachers, administrators, janitors to the white schools, and let's send some white grown folks to the black schools, and let's let the adults figure out how to be together. Let's let us work out this change, this thing that's going to be very different. And after we do that, then we can send the kids. And the kids will have black people that they can see, and the white kids. They imagined that black schools would still continue, and they'd be integrated with white students, and so they had a different kind of idea of what was going to happen. But instead, the NAACP decided we're going to send the kids because it will soften the hearts of white America. They're not going to attack children. They thought, right? Like the same way Thurgood Marshall was like, they won't resist Brown. They're a nation of laws, like on paper. What they thought was, they would never actually attack children. So that's why we're going to do that. Adults may have a problem. There may be fights. Adults are going to be adults, but the children, they're innocent. And so this is how you end up with stuff like Ruby Bridges, 6 years old, desegregating the school in New Orleans, sitting in a classroom for a year by herself because white parents will not allow any of their children to sit in a classroom with her. What kind of what does that do to her? And again, when you think about, but not her as a warrior martyr, but her as a 6-year-old child who was at a school where people were happy and playing. She had recess, she had friends, and then all of a sudden, here she is sitting in a classroom with one white teacher, and nobody will talk to her, and people like, she has to have federal marshals walk her into class every day. What kind of sense does that make? So the folks in Topeka were like, we don't think that this is gonna work out. Fought them, of course they lost. It's hailed as this big victory, and so the black teachers in Topeka go to the Board of Education. They're like, okay, we're ready to, how does this work? What do we do? And not one black teacher was hired. Not one could find employment in Topeka or Wichita. The black schools and the infrastructure for black education and politics that had built up. In that ruling, it was the beginning of the end of that. I want to be clear, I am not saying I think separate but equal is great, let's go back to segregation. I really am not, but I am telling a story that's true, that we don't talk about enough. And what Brown cost black people some things, as much as it gave to a percentage of us, and it's a percentage, but me and Bettina's sitting here because in some ways we learned to navigate these spaces as being in an integrated school. Although you came a part of, like you, Rochester, your stories of Rochester are not quite the same as
It's the rock, baby. It's the rock. It's the rock.
But it's a more complex story that needs telling, and that's what I try to do, and I try to humanize some of those moments.
All right, I got a lot of questions.
Okay.
But I know we got audience questions got to come, so let me keep going. I want to talk about a few things, and we're going to integrate them all.
Okay.
You talk in the book about racism being a public health issue. And I'm thinking about your father, racism being a public health issue. And here we are today, facing so much. How do you understand racism as a public health issue? And you say this in the book, racism is a public health issue, but you can't teach anti-racism. Racism is a public health issue. So how do we, as black folks, survive? What models should we be looking at? Because I truly believe that the pendulum of justice will swing back. Now, how long it's going to take, I don't know. But it will swing back.
But we got to prepare.
But we have to prepare. And will we be any smarter? When it swings back, will we still be asking for the same crumbs? And so what I love about this book, it is also an instructional guide. So we are not asking for the same crumbs. So we are not making the same mistakes. So our Thurgood Marshalls, we can tell them, please sit down.
So you say next time,
Right.
you're going to understand
Right.
that they may zig instead of zag.
Yes.
Now what you going to do?
Right.
Have another plan.
Right. So what do you think these models are? How do we talk about? How do we learn? What should we be learning in moments like this?
So one of the things that I think, people tell me that it's dark, there's a lot of hard history. Because black education is black politics, and it always has been. And so everything is wrapped up, for the nation as a whole, but certainly for black people, health, electoral politics, reading, which allows you to function in certain ways, employment, like most of what's really important somehow, schools are central to them. And to understand how to rebuild, you have to understand actually what is happening in schools. So the way that I get to this public health aspect of education in more contemporary times, like this is like from the 2015s to present, is there's a series of lawsuits that young people all across the country have been filing, suing for their undereducation. In New York, they literally sued and said, racism, we want an anti-racist education because racism, which we understand as being things like most of the schools are that poor children attend, and poor children in New York are Black and Latinx primarily, are seated by freeways, for example. And the pollution from freeways is well known. The World Health Organization and everybody else, the AMA, have said that pollution is not good. It leads to problems with concentration, hyperactivity. You're losing brain cells. Like, we know what putting children in a toxic environment does, and yet they put schools that educate Black kids very often, sometimes on top of Superfund waste sites. In the story that I tell here, they built my grandparents' school, Williams Elementary, literally on top of the bodies of Black people. So on a Black cemetery, they just didn't move the bodies and built the school on top of it. Without actually thinking, what kind of health issues come up from that? You have folks out in Detroit and in New York, we're talking about how they're tasked with, like, their job is to pick up the dead rodents every morning. Like, this is what you have to do. Your teacher assigns a student with, there's a rodent that's dead. You're gonna have to clear that. These students are talking about not having running water in their schools. Not having teachers in their schools, literally having to educate themselves, teach themselves, because teachers are not showing up. The state of decay and decline that you can only call racism, because nobody else's kids are treated like this other than Indigenous children. The only other group that is consistently having their educational futures intervened with, I think, is Indigenous kids.
And you say in the book that education that Native Americans receive is the precursor.
Is the precursor.
For what we will get.
It is absolutely that idea of segregation. So I tell this story, this is my one, like, going back to the founding fathers to talk about what they were doing, about a young man named Kogetha Getchton, who, his father is a leader. And the father had this idea of, let's have, at the time there were only 13 states. Father said, let's have a 14th state, it's gonna be an Indigenous homeland. We'll be fine. You know, we'll all move there, we'll be self-governing, we will negotiate with you, we'll be the 51st state, we'll be a part of you, but we will have states' rights. Let's do that. And the founding fathers are like, yeah, I don't know if we'll do all of that, but we will let you be a guide for us, we will let you work for us. Long story short, the soldiers end up killing him as he's a guide and helping them out, you know. And they feel badly about this, and they take his son and send him to the college in New Jersey, which is today Princeton University. But they sent him there because they wanted him to receive the education that their children would receive, so that when he assumed leadership, they assumed he would take over from his father. When he assumed leadership, he would understand how they thought. He would understand their ways. He would be one of them. And then they could negotiate with him in all kinds of ways. So he gets there and gets in trouble. He mouths off to somebody. All the white children that are mouthing off get to stay. He gets kicked out. George Washington, he is a ward of Congress. He's like the first sort of work study student or financial aid student. So they make him a ward of Congress. Jefferson, and he's writing to George Washington regularly, and Hamilton is busy denying his request for funds. Like, all the fun and foul, they say, we're gonna take care of you, and then they abandon him after he gets in trouble. And the chaplain of the school, when he gets kicked out, they finally pay and let him go, and the white men kill him too. But and they killed his mother too. It's very tragic. But what they decide, the chaplain of the school says, you know, this whole trying to have these indigenous people be like us, be around us, learning our way, it's not working. I've never seen it work out. They're just not capable. We should stop it. We should stop trying to have them integrate with us. This is 17-something. I forgot, it was 17-something. We should stop that and figure out a way to educate them separately. Because first we need to civilize them, and the next thing that comes along is the federal system of boarding schools, where the government is authorized to just take whatever indigenous child they want to, just take them from their parents, no consent, put them in these boarding schools where a third of the children were worked to death or beat to death. Their hair was cut, they couldn't speak their language, they were told not to have any kind of relationship with any people because those people were bad. And there's a connection between that and in more contemporary times. I talk about how one of the things that integration programs started to do could lead Black children to believe the only way they could learn is if they're taken out of their communities, if they're taken away from their families, if they have to exist, and that they have to learn to be civilized and exist in this other world. But for true, my integration experiences, that's why I can not run screaming through the hallways of where I work, because as a young age, I kind of got what to do, what not to do. So I think it does start this thinking about how to use education as a weapon. Starts with indigenous folks, and they perfect it with Black folks.
They play no games,
No,
no shortcuts.
they're thinking things through.
Yes. You talk about Detroit, you talk about New York City, but you also are holding this idea, and I think it's important to take up, is how is the current educational system that we're facing in this idea of integration leading us towards Jim Crow?
Okay, I'm gonna ask you, what do you think?
No,
Let's start with you. You write about the same stuff in a different way.
I do, but I like hearing you historian. I'll play one. I guess I would say that I'm someone who deeply believes that Black children need their own spaces to learn. I've seen that for myself, I've seen that for my own kids, I've seen that for my nieces and my nephews who both go to HBCUs right now. And I am not saying that we should not integrate, but what I'm saying is that this place was never built for us to integrate. It's not built for that. So we keep trying to force something that this place does not want. It wants to resist, and the resistance is not just they say, no, you can't come here. Right? It's violence. It's terror. You talk about Ruby Bridges. And, I'm someone who lives in the South but always tries my best not to be that New Yorker. So, we talk about the South. Boston doesn't even think about integration until like 74. And it's met with fierce violence.
There are bombs, there's dynamite.
Right,
There's spit.
they're not playing with Boston. New York is not playing with integration. Like, they're 20 years after Brown. And these are supposed to be this is Boston, like every Harvard, MIT, Tufts, like all the liberals and elites. And they were like, no, we're not doing that. And to this day, Boston is still struggling.
You know that y'all have all seen this photograph. It's called The Soiling of Old Glory. And it's they're standing outside, and someone is using a flag as a javelin almost. And there's a Black man who's got an afro, it's the 70s, and he's coming to a hearing around school desegregation. Like the backstory for that in Boston. He's in Boston, coming to talk about school desegregation, and a white dude picks up a flag and uses it as a weapon. It's metaphorical, though, right? For what's happening. The story of the book is not that integration. The thing is, if you get to integrate, it actually does okay. If you get to go to high performing schools, but it does okay because you're in schools where things work. The heat works. The HVAC, the water. You're not gonna get lead poisoning drinking the water. You got teachers who are there regularly and not leaving every year. I mean, there are reasons that those kind of schools work. It's not some magic of white people. It's the functionality of those institutions that are meant to educate white people, which is an important distinction to make. But they resisted. They will not let integration widespread. The reason that about 20 to 25% of us have actually done what you would call kind of integrated educationally is, some people have done some studies, like for some reason 20% seems to be the tipping point in schools. Like when parents say, I will send my child to a diverse school, I would, you know. What they mean is no more than 20%. Like when folks have done these studies, like when you get to like 30%, they're like, it's a black school, it's low performing, I can't. But 20%, it's like, it's few enough. That's my story. I was one in an entire classroom. My son, it was, because he was in honors and AP track, even though he was in so-called diverse schools, he was always in a track where he was a black boy. He was the one black boy. Always. It might have been girl, sometimes it was a Latinx person, but the one black boy by himself. The mechanisms for keeping a more robust kind of integration from happening, which includes, well, we want to integrate, everything's fine, but we don't want busing. I mean, nobody likes busing really, but you know, we don't, I mean, black people really don't like busing either, that's the thing. But you know, but we're not gonna do that. We're not gonna let you redraw district lines, no. You know, everything that could work. We're not gonna have the suburbs participate in any kind of integration after white flight has taken white folks out of urban areas. There's not enough of them to integrate with. Who are you supposed to integrate with? They have moved, you know, somewhere else. But we will not be included in that. So every functional solution that would allow for a robust racial integration, it's like we want it, but not those, not that way. And so as a result, the resistance has led to a resegregation of schools so that you have levels that are close to 1968, 1970 right now. But we don't talk about that. We just kind of go, well, we should integrate harder. Well, how is that supposed to happen? You know, if we could come up with a mechanism that they wouldn't be denounced, you can't test them to the school. Like, nothing that has worked. And that's the issue, I think, to take a cold hard look. Like, that's really the story of why I'm saying integration fails black children, because white parents, and they are literally white, I'm not casting aspersions, like really the majority of folks, are the white parents, politicians, and philanthropists won't allow it to happen. And as a result, the majority of black kids then get what the leftovers, get what we're okay with them having. And that shouldn't be acceptable, but it apparently is.
Yeah. So I know you will have some questions. I want to make sure we get to audience questions, but my last question for you is 2025. What else gonna do? Like how would you explain this to someone? Because I also think it's important that we have language to help folks understand what we are actually facing. So how would you explain this?
So I really do, I am not being hysterical when I say we need to pay attention to what it would take to reinstitute Jim Crow segregation and levels of white supremacy, because the thing holding it back is not some sort of forward progress and we're enlightened. It's a set of laws that declare black citizenship and declare black people to be citizens. There's something to appeal to. It doesn't always, it's a messy, but there's something to appeal to. And most of us, not in our 80s, have never actually lived in this country where there were no laws on the books that we could strategize around. And so my fear here is we have a sitting Supreme Court Justice, Clarence Thomas, who in the Shelby v. Holder case, in the voting rights case, literally called all of the 1960s civil rights laws, the 64, 65, 68, housing, voting, and just general sort of, leave them alone. He called them fruit of the poisonous tree. The poisonous tree was the 14th Amendment. So a sitting justice writes an opinion calling civil rights laws poison fruit. And the tree and the poison fruit is the thing that guarantees us citizenship. We need to pay attention to what it would take, what those laws are holding back. What happens if they get dislodged a little bit? Because what's happening now around education that's particularly chilling, to me, is the thing is they're dismantling. I mean, I'm probably not as pro-clutchy about getting rid of the Department of Education as some people overall. However, for poor people and for civil rights, for students who are in classes and aggressed in different ways, or who are treated unequally, who do not have the funding that they need, the people who come and see about them, who make that right, are the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education, and it's been dismantled. Now that is not coming back. So the moment for me really does call for some sober assessment of how far this thing could go, without being hysterical and fearful. But we need to understand, if it's just rights, and they don't already said they're trying to get rid of, the Trump signed the executive order, which carries no force of law. But at least let you know what he's thinking. He's like, we don't want that 65 civil rights law. From now on, it's null and void. And then appointed a bunch of people in the Department of Justice who are the other folks that you go to. The reason the mid-century, by the 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement, Mississippi Summer, etc., those folks will tell you it was the Department of Justice coming in and asserting authority over these folks in these states who were bent on black destruction. That's the only thing that made a difference. They're gone. They're gone. So as we think about what we may be faced with, just educationally, I mean, the rest of it is too horrible to think about, but just educationally, I think we have to go local. I think we have to go hyper-local. So much of what we're focusing on and have been is the federal level in a lot of ways. We want those presidential elections. We get up for those, but this is a battle that's almost block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood. There's community schools that are working in different ways depending on where they are. But the thing about them, at least on paper, that I think is a model worth really looking at, is they're supposed to be spaces where teachers and principals and students and caregivers come together to decide what they want to happen in that neighborhood school. That these are schools in neighborhoods. It's back to separate but equal. They're funding separate, but they've given up on integration. And so it's like, let's figure out, without saying it, let's figure out how to put extra money into schools that are segregated, but make them functional. I think it's a moment, like some of the black folks in the 20s, 40s, 50s, and 60s who are a little revolutionary minded, where you take over institutions. Nobody care about them schools. Well, make them what you want them to be. Come up with the curriculum. So I wrote a book last year about a woman named Mary McLeod Bethune, and one of the phenomenal interventions I think she and hers had was coming up with ways of hiding curriculum in plain sight. That when folks would come and ask and kind of, they didn't know these comic books that they had come up with. We're teaching about black inventors. They just look like, oh yes, this is okay. The black people are teaching the children with comic books. We don't know what it is about, but she was teaching them, what she said is, we need curriculum and ways to teach black children who they actually are before these people teach them who they want them to be. And that was 1930s. So it's a moment, I think, that we have to go back to some folks who figured out how to navigate and build, and just do it. Like, honestly, just do it. and do it, be stealthy. Don't go all on social media, tell everybody. Don't try to be all in the, getting big grants, telling everybody this is what I'm doing, come follow me. If you care about Black education and Black students right now, we're gonna have to, those people, if it's just 10 in a neighborhood who wanna get together and talk about how are we gonna do this, it's like that. It's time for you to find your 10, your 15, and strategize, because there's a lot of precarity here that's worrisome. But if you're gonna protect something, protect Black kids. If you're gonna throw down for something, throw down for Black kids. And the schools are important like that. So I think we're at the Q&A part. Y'all got questions? Y'all got things or statements, things you want to talk about? I'm open to all of it.
This isn't working, so you just shout it out.
I'm not the shout. I'm a loud person. I'm an educator. I'm a high school educator. I teach ESOL, and I'm a former special education teacher. Everything going on, I have students who are receiving deportation notices, all these different things. And I just want to know, from your point of view, what advice would you give an educator who is a Black educator in these diverse schools? Like I taught at KIP, which is a charter brand now. It's a public school, and now we can't even like KIP, the charter schools. You have more freedom to talk about what you wanted and stuff like that. But now, if you even mention the word inclusion, you can lose your job because of all these laws. What advice would you give someone who is not, I would say radical, but radical in education, who's up to date on knowledge? I made my undergrad degree in ethnic studies, but I just feel like a lot of the stuff I learned, I can't use, and I'm having conversations with my students about, are you safe? And there's been, houses are getting raided. So like, what advice would you give someone who's in the classroom with K-12, everything happening?
I think that's a really great question, a really brave question, a really timely question. I'll say this to you, and I'll say this to the teachers who are in the audience right now. And I'm sure maybe you agree with me. Black folks, we have never believed that school was going to be the place to educate our children, solely, right? And so we've gotten quite comfortable with the idea that education takes place within the public school setting. We've gotten way too comfortable with that. But I know, what my ancestors know, you teach these babies in the church, you teach them in the basement, you teach them in the back, wherever. So we have to become way more cunning, way more stealthy, and more underground. So you can't do it in the classroom, that's fine. Get a group of teachers, we do a Saturday school. We'll meet these kids at the Boys and Girls Club. We'll meet them somewhere else, right? The school, that's just a building. Education is totally different. So it's going to mean a little bit more work. And I also say to our immigrant students, our students who are being deported, I don't know what to do about that. But I do think we have to affirm them that they are deserving to be here. And I don't care what this country says and who says it. We have to affirm to them that they are worthy to be here. There's nothing wrong with them. It is something wrong with us. And I cannot stop what's happening, but you are worthy, and they have to know that.
I don't have a question, but I do want to just add to what she said. Well, not add, but just say something in response. Number one, it's not a law on the books that say we can't use certain language. It's wording out there that is used to fearmonger and oppress. And so we, knowing that, have to be strategic in how we use the language and still get the message across. We've been code switching for years. So we don't have to use their code words that they say we can't use, because districts are fearful right now. The leadership in districts are like, but we're not hearing enough, so we're really not sure what direction to go in, so we're just gonna be cautious and tell you all, don't say this, don't do that. But there's no law against it. So either we can be righteous revolutionaries, or we can just be strategic in how we convey information to our youth.
So let me, because I will go back to Mary McLeod Bethune all day, all night. But there's also a group of educators during that period, A. Philip Randolph, Carter G. Woodson, Mary McLeod Bethune, Nannie Helen Burroughs. Like, there's some folks who were teaching in the Jim Crow South under the threat of violence if they were too successful, if they were seen to be too successful, if they impacted their students too positively. And there's a whole, I mean, without being one of these people who's like, oh, read the book, there's a whole strategy from that period that Black educators have left us about when you're teaching in unsafe space. It's not safe for your job. It's not safe for your, I mean, you know, Florida, they would lynch you to look at you. I mean, Florida, no joke, and lots of places, or harm you in other ways. But there's a history, part of our history, it is how you come up with the curriculum, the games, the strategies. You strip down what you need your kids to know most. Not the math and I mean, you want them to know these things, obviously. But what is it you want them to feel? Who do you want them to be? And then you design curriculum around that doesn't look like that is not, we don't have the circle of freedom today, and let's talk about, it's something else. It requires creativity. But we got models. These folks did that with far less resources than we have. We just don't know it. We just don't know it.
Hi, my question was sorry. Okay.
So the National Assessment of Educational Progress released a study, and it said that 84% of Black students lack proficiency in mathematics, and 85% of Black students lack proficiency in reading skills.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
No, let me say, it's been a crisis of literacy. These schools, there are all kinds of reports from the 60s when people are resisting integration. The North schools, the state said, Black children who attend schools in Newark are losing ground every year. The longer they're in that system, the greater the gap is between them and other people. Schools in Connecticut have the same kinds of reports. The violent undereducation of Black children is not, this is the 70% who are going to the integrated schools who are not, you know, we just are not paying a lot of attention to what's happening. This is a long-standing problem. And if you can't read, how you gonna read a bond issue, for example? How does that mess with your ability to be a citizen? The case in Detroit that I write about, these students actually sue the state and win because they say that they don't have literacy and therefore they can't be citizens because something like a half of adults in Detroit schools were considered illiterate. Not proficient, illiterate, because there's a difference, right? And then they're like, how do we actually participate in the work? And they won. And then the governor was like, I will settle out of court and give money to teach literacy, which didn't actually fix the systemic kind of problem. These schools are not, that's what I'm saying, the Department of Education, like what y'all been doing. How are Black people being so aggressively undereducated, so broadly? And it's known, this is not secret. And it's not but what are we doing about it? You know, what do those of us who do care, what have we come up with? And it's not that I can sit here and say this is exactly what you need to do. But my grandmother was a reading teacher in the segregated South. Those children learned how to read. I know it because I was reading early because she taught me how she taught them. She didn't do anything special. to me, but in the 3rd grade, I got picked for the gifted and talented program, which was nothing but you read a book. And I could read it because my grandmother taught me to read. They were like, you are clearly gifted and talented and a genius. There were all kinds of them in the black school that she taught, because she taught us all to read like that. How is it? How is it that we've lost that? That we haven't passed that on? And I think it has something to do with, you would know more about this than me, with teacher education post-integration, I would say. I think there's something that happened around the professionalization of teaching that may have taken some of that creativity. I'm saying you would know more because you're at a teacher's college.
I would just say when you read data like that, or you read a report like that, you should just say, oh, it's working perfectly the way they intended it to. Like those numbers let me know that this system is working the way they intended to. That's what that data tells me. And I think to your point, right, when you start to dig in that data, you have to say, well, how many of those students had high performing educators, highly skilled educators? How many of those students are going to schools that have the resources that they need? So data like that and reports like that, they're these stunning numbers, but it's not really getting at the true story. The true story of those numbers is anti-blackness, racism, and violence taking place in our schools. I'll give you another, this is what I say to teachers all the time. Everybody in this room knows that we have a prison to school pipeline. Try not to curse. Really? We actually can sit here and say, oh yeah, we got a prison to school pipeline. Yeah, we got a prison to school pipeline. Ain't nobody mad? There's not, we are walking in schools every day where we know that we are sending black and brown children to prison, and that these places function, our logic and a function of prison, and we're just like, cool. Right? It is so much destruction. It is so much anti-blackness. It is so much violence in our schools that we are now settling and complicit to the harm that's being done. And then we get reports that validate that harm, and we don't implicate the system that is doing that harm. That has nothing to do with the students. That has nothing to do with the parents. That has everything to do with the system. I tell people all the time, I'm an 80s baby. My parents weren't even around. You were in the 80s, your parents were not around. They had a damn public service announcement at 10 o'clock that said, you know where your parents are. So don't blame your parents. Our parents were in the streets. So it ain't about the parents. It's about the teacher that you have in front of that child. And when it comes to black and brown children, we have some of the least experienced, least skilled teachers sitting in front of the students who need the most. And they got the audacity.
And least empathetic.
Say it again? And least empathetic.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Standing, teaching our babies, and then when the babies' test scores come back, they don't want to learn. Nah, Vlad. This got so much to do with you in this system. You had your hand right there. And
Yes.
the brother in the back.
I was going to say something similar. I was going to say we forget a lot of times that school is doing what it's designed to do.
That's
So
right.
my question is, we know that there's some models out there that work for us. What do we do and how do we get those resources? Because I know for me, I tried to open a charter school, and the whole premise was we're going to teach black kids entrepreneurship. Because guess what? If they don't want to go to college, they have a frame to now create financial stability and freedom for their families, right? That was shut down. Of course, the charter school, nope, we don't necessarily want you to do that. Of course, that's not what they said, but there's certain things that, once you put them out there, people are not galvanizing to make this happen. I know we have to do it for ourselves, but what does that really look like to get the resources to be like, you know what, I'm going to actually make this happen because I know there's a need to give kids what they need in our space.
Let me, I want to go back to another book I wrote called Cutting School. Because one is Cutting School, Privatization, Segregation, and the End of Public Education, which I look prescient right now, right? I look like I'll take you Butler. I can see in the future. But in that book, one of the points that I make is the dismantling of Brown led black teachers out of the South and up to places like Chicago, Oakland, blah, blah, blah. They started black independent schools. There were about 450 black independent schools at the height. There were some for indigenous kids too, but 450 black independent schools, and they were organized, and many of them were educating black children like crazy well. So Marva Collins, who's in Chicago, was doing so much amazing work with black kids. And she said her shorthand for wanting the most vulnerable kids was, I want the smelliest kids. She's like, I want the poorest, smelliest, the ones whose parents are paying them no mind. That is who I want you to bring me. And she educated those children to and through graduate school. They write dissertations about what that was. Charter schools put black independent schools out of business. And I'm not coming for charter schools. I'm just saying. But the model, and even though black folks couldn't afford to pay for it, because what I'm thinking about is this question of how do we get the resources. These schools, the Panther School, the innovation of the Panther School, to me, one of the most amazing innovations is, well, they were sort of like, we're going to have mixed ability groups instead of grade levels. So you could be 15, you could be 10. If your ability was what it was, then we're all going to be a community and learn together and take the stigma. We're going to be learners and not be sort of, we have to. That's a brilliant kind, to me, it's a small thing. It's a brilliant kind of intervention that disrupts the standard ways that we think of education. But though what they did, they had to do outside of the system. Keontae Yamada Taylor has this term, predatory inclusion, where she's like, you get included inside of systems, and then because of the parasitic nature of those systems, they suck all the resources and the life out, and then you're included, and what do you have? So again, either you're gonna take over a traditional school, like just take it over, nobody cares. I keep saying nobody cares about these schools, like really. I think you could probably turn one in some struggling area out in the boondocks into some kind of model for, because nobody cares about them. Really, you have to have some stealth about yourself, or you're gonna have a black independent school and people have to figure out how to pay you some kind of way. But what that is, are they paying in time? Are they paying in their skill? Are they paying in mentoring kids? What the payment is could be different, but that's what gives you the freedom. If you want the money that comes from the traditional system, then you're always going to be buffeted by what they're doing. But we can't afford to only have one way. So some people need to be inside, some people need to be outside, some people need to be starting their own homeschools, but we have to be in community with each other. This idea that you just do it yourself with your vision and not in community with others who share that vision, I don't think we will survive. But I think in community, black people, we are creative. We are creative geniuses when we want to be, when we have to be. But when we're comfortable, we're not so much. So that I think there's a lot of ways we could do it, but creativity.
And I just say this really quickly is, we have to, not as black folks, not as white folks, just as human beings, get out the scarcity model. Because it is the scarcity model that tells us, right, our black kids, if they don't go to this school, then they won't go to this school. Right? Oh, my kids have to go to Harvard. My kids have to go there. My kids have to go this. And so it's the scarcity model. And that's why they can make goddamn Vanderbilt $100,000 a year, because we all believe that our kids got to go to this school to be successful. And so we have to re-educate our community around black independent schools. Right? I sent my kids to, in Atlanta, Georgia, a black independent school here. Right? We have to re-educate about the importance of it, what it can do, what it can instill in somebody, and let them understand. Talk the language. You're still going to get high test scores. You're still going to get this. But we have this idea that if my kid is not here, then all of these opportunities are somehow not afforded to them anymore because they didn't take that path. Right? And we are constantly talking about how much we hate white supremacy, but constantly following down the same path.
Yes.
So we have to start to re-educate ourselves, our community. And what I love about your book and what you're saying is that even the architects of Brown, many who were educated in all black schools, We're deeply trying to fight for integration. Boy, the devil be busy. Busy. White supremacy busy, like Thurgood Marshall, like you were all educated at Howard. You were groomed and educated and at this beautiful place we call the Mecca. So why would you not want that for every other child? But as you know, whiteness is a hell of a drug. So I think that's a part of the work as well, is that we start to unpack, unwrap, and be honest about how whiteness is showing up in our schools, in our conversations, and what we want for our children. Because what we want for our children, if it's the same as what white people want, then what's the point? You got your hand up, brother.
That's a perfect wrap to my question. I'm sure we're on the same page. Like, the seeds of the boarding schools for indigenous folks were like inherently like awful, racist, anti-indigenous, oppressive, all of that. To the same degree, I believe that our public school system as it exists now, the seeds of it, the very premise of it is anti-black and racist, everything about it. To like, even what is the requirements for a high school diploma, I believe those stipulations in the Carnegie Press, like, I truly believe in that those are also anti-black and xenophobic and oppressive. And so I think there's a lack of, that's critical. I don't often run into people who, we talk about black schools and we talk about these independent things who don't, but there's not a lot of people who criticize, like, what type of education are we trying to provide? Are we just looking for the black version of what the white schools are already doing or what the state's already requiring folks to do? But like, oh, we'll just make it, put it in some Kinsey cloth throughout the year. But like, why 4 credits of English and language arts? And why this many hours? Like, I find a lot of people aren't criticizing that. And I wonder if you all have similar criticisms or gripes, or I imagine do, with like just what we consider a high school diploma and what the credits and requirements are. If you have any insight around how do we get people to shift their mindset politically to see like there's another way that we can do this. We don't have to just do the black version of what the white schools are doing, or like my schools like to call the Black Ivy League sort of situations. Like, that's not an actual model of things that we should do, right?
I had a student Monday in my class. He did this wonderful project, and he used what's happening in education as a horror movie. It was brilliant. It was a really dope presentation. And it was kind of like the get out of education. And what he was really getting at was that the psychological damage that is being done. Right? It's not just about the lack of materials or the lack of the teachers. Like, all those things are truly important. But what we don't talk enough about is the psychological damage. And it's almost a horror movie. It's like we're living inside of terror. So this is a constant horror movie that we're living in. And when we even perpetuate the terror and the horror, like, what does that even mean? But I also want us to be clear, right? I like to read a lot of fiction. There's a great book that just came out called Sky for the Elephants. Right, if you're going to do 2 things, read this, pick up Sky for the Elephants, put them in conversation together. Oh my God. But what happens in Sky for the Elephants is that one day, all white people just walk towards the water and drown. And the question is now, what do we do as black people? And the book is trying to answer some really thoughtful questions. Because I hear what you're saying, but what you're saying is not going to move the black bourgeoisie. Right. They're not going to be moved. They're like, go, 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 go. I like what you're saying, brother, but no.
Yeah.
Right? The black church got issues. Right? So we are a fractured people. Right. And I'm not quite sure what you're asking is possible in this context. So, to your point, in community, big brick by brick, with the folks who love black people, with the folks who care about black people, with the folks that you ain't got to retrain to love black people, the folks who might need some retraining but only a little bit. We ain't got time to teach you the whole black book today. Right? That's all we can really do. Because we are a fractured people and we do not agree. And I think I love black people, but we use the word community sometimes a little too loosely. It's loose with it. And we just got to be real about that. So what you are saying, I deeply, profoundly agree with. But until we all get our healing and our therapy that's culturally relevant and culturally, like, we got a lot of work to do. And it's going to start, I hope, with amazing teachers in classrooms with young kids, teaching them to love themselves, to love their skin, to love their nose, to love who they are, to love all black people. Big bellies, gold teeth, and all of it. Like, that's the type of work that is really revolutionary work right now. And some of us are built different to do it. But I don't think what you're asking is unreasonable, but I think it's unreasonable with the fracturing of who we are here.
Yeah, I'll just say very quickly, sometimes, because I so venerate black teachers in this book, I'm always talking about black teachers. People are like, yes, we need more black teachers, but y'all know not all black people like black people, right? And you know, not all black people love black children. And I saw it at the height of the TFA movement, which is, thankfully, it seems to be slowing some. But they started recruiting from HBCUs. They started really having a DEI for Ivy League schools. Like, we want more black. And I would talk to these folks who they didn't grow up around black people. They were the black, their family, their house was the black community in the middle of a white community. They don't know the complexities of black folk. We are broad in our thinking, and we've never always agreed politically, and that's been a good thing. Like, really, under the surface, there's always been tensions about what you move forward and how you move forward. But as you're saying, this community, it's kind of like we all have to believe one thing. Yeah, I always think about that, what is it, man? Joe Clark, that movie,
Chain the door. Chain the door.
Yes, where he's like chaining doors and walking around with bats. How is that model of black education? When people are like, he needs to be Secretary of Education, he's brilliant. You know, black people were saying, because black children need more discipline. Black children need to learn. They got dysfunctional families. It sounds like Moynihan. We sound like Moynihan. The families are dysfunctional. They don't know how to teach anybody how to be a man. That's why these children are out here running around. Not all of us like all of us. And so the solutions have to be, I mean, I think they're going to start with us because that's who it is, but there has to be a community of the willing. If you find somebody Asian who's like, I love me some black children, let me help you, but you start building with them. Don't wait for the black ones to come because they may or may not. They may break your heart.
I think you had a hand up back there.
Yes. Hi. My name is Bridget.
Last question.
Last question. I'll make it quick. Hi.
I like that energy though, really.
Yes, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for being here, everyone. I'm having a great time. I have so many thoughts. I'm going to try to keep it cute.
Okay.
I want to start off with a quote, and I can't remember where I saw it, but someone told me somewhere on the internet, in order to have a village, you need to be a villager. I'm just going to say that, and people can do with that what they will. 1. 2, I also think it's fascinating to think, connecting back to previous points, what we believe to be education versus schooling. And we had another author who spoke to this a lot. I think we have to, like you said, interrogate how we reinforce, replicate, push forward white supremacy culture in our desire to be wanted, right? We will never be enough. And by we, I mean insert identity. So what does it look like to just accept the suck and go figure something else out? I think we need everybody. I think we need to teach kids and adults healing, like you said. I think we need carpenters. I think teach now. And like me, I'm not having kids, I will never have kids, but I have kids in my life who I love and adore, and I'm a part of their education. We're not, in fact, they're white. We're not blood related, but I love those babies. They know that they can come to me. And I think it takes everyone spending however much time building and putting into kids for us to like get anywhere. And maybe I'm oddly hopeful today. I'm gonna sit in that because I've had a really shit day. But that's what comes up for me. Like, education is so much more than reading to a book, and I love reading. Yet and is what I'm kind of speaking to. So all this to say, we need all kinds of people, and we need all kinds of people to teach all kinds of things.
That sounds like a good period.
Yeah, I mean, I went to vocational high school.
Period.
So
Any trades.
my high school had an airplane inside. It had a full kitchen inside. We had a gas station inside of my high school. It was 2,000 kids. Now, why you put 2,000 kids in one building that's crazy. But I mean, I went to a place where we left half the day to go work. Right? We had jobs, and so I'm a product of what's possible. Like I'm for vocational education, but that's not just. I think to your point, we to your point, right? We will get one model and just run. And just run. Like, this is what we're doing now. Like, that's kind of the American ethos around education. Like, oh, we do this, and we do that for like 15 years, and then we cut it off, we do this for 15 years. Like, and we can't have all these things working in unison at one time. Right? And so, I think to what you said is, our biggest weapon is our imagination.
Please, yes.
That's our biggest weapon is our imagination. And when we turn that off, we lose each and every time.
Yes.
And so how do we help people? We're teachers in the classroom. We have who will be the next voting constituents in front of us every day. How do we teach them to love, to have empathy, to be kind, to be thoughtful, and to be critical? Right? If you just read one book, you ain't smart. You just have one perspective on something, you are not smart. But it ain't even going to start until we stop lying to kids. We just lie all the time. We know, all of us, we be like, hey, November roll around, Columbus. That's a lie. We love to lie. We lie about King. I have a dream speech. That was not really the speech. We lie all the time, but teachers only teach what they know. And so that classroom, the limitations of that classroom are on you. And how do we help teachers be creative and expansive and knowledgeable and thoughtful and really build a pipeline to do that? We have incredible minds, right? I think the problem is that our incredible minds are not being asked how to build. And so that's why we have to go back to, we got 10 people who want to build, that's all we ain't going to worry about nobody else. I cannot worry about trying to get 100. I got to nurture my 10. And I think at the end of the day, the ancestors have to say, well done. That's it. Right? You did what was in your control. Well done. And if it catches on and more for 10 and 10 and 10 and 10 and 10, that's beautiful. But I think too often we get so discouraged trying to get the masses that we don't nurture the 10.
Amen. Thank y'all so much.
Thank y'all for coming out.
Yeah, we're going to invite y'all to come out and get your book signed. If you still need to buy a book, you can do that. We have backlists for both of these folks as well. So come on out, and if you have other comments, you can make them out there. Thank you both so much for this.